My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Well, there's still a lot of questions about what the Trump administration and his education secretary, Linda McMahon, are doing with the Department of Education. And there's a lot of questions about what the future of the department is, if this particular department has a future. One of the people that we had on in the run-up to some of these changes at the Department of Education was Gloria Romero, who, in addition to being the co-founder of the Explore Academy Charter School, served as majority leader of the California State Senate from 2005 to 2008, longtime political figure, politician, and activist in California, but subsequently someone who became a Trump supporter and I believe a Republican. And she had a really interesting op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and we interviewed her at the time. And my only regret with that interview is that I didn't have longer to chat with her. Now that we've had a couple of months to see what's actually happening at the department, struck me as an opportune time for a return visit. Very, very pleased to welcome back to the program Gloria Romero. Gloria, it's great to talk with you again. Thanks for staying up late with us.
Well, thank you. Good to be with you.
It's great to be with you. For people that are unfamiliar with your journey, Gloria, politically, can you give us kind of just the Reader's Digest version of how someone who was at the very top of, or near the top of the California Democratic political hierarchy made the decision to leave the Democratic Party and become a Trump supporter?
Well, like so many others before me, you know, whether it be Leo Terrell or Bobby Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, even Donald Trump himself. Essentially, I saw that I couldn't recognize the Democratic Party anymore. I often tell people I really didn't leave the party. The party left me and so many others like me. But I think one of the major turns was when there basically was a coup pulled on Joe Biden, and not that Joe Biden was a great candidate by no means, but at least 14 million people had gone out in this thing called a democracy, right? Had voted for the guy, and suddenly, in a back room somewhere, you know, Speaker Pelosi and who knows who she was with, basically did what we call the dedazo. You know, Latin America, you point the finger and say, this is going to be our candidate now, and basically threw out 14 million votes. That was outrageous at the time. So that was one of the major factors for me. But really, it really came down to it. By that time, I just no longer recognized what this party was, what it stood for, and what it was saying. I didn't want to support any longer. So I left. And I had been listening to what Trump was saying. I agreed with him on so many angles and issues, and changed my party identification and voted for Trump.
How do you think the Trump administration is doing so far, both in general and on the issue of education?
Well, he said winning, and I really believe we are winning. A major issue on which Americans voted was to have a secure, closed border. Look, you know, I believe that we need to reform our immigration system, but completely throwing open the border, making a mockery of citizenship like the Democratic Party did, that's no way to do it. You know, you've got to sit down, you've got to work on issues. The Democrats were claiming we need a bill, and as we saw, and as Trump has said, all we needed was a president. He was able to secure the border, close the border, and basically restore what citizenship means, for individuals. It's an honor. It's a privilege. And so that was very important. I think that's a major issue. The economy, again, too, we're going through some tipsy-topsy things with tariffs, people trying to understand them. But I fully support what the Trump agenda is trying to do. I do believe in restoring, the working class, putting American workers first. And that does mean you've got to basically encourage and promote manufacturing in the United States, buying American, and tariffs, when used well, can add to that. So I agree with him on that. Let's get through this, but let's do it. I think one of the highlights, of course, is Doge, and I absolutely am just thankful to Elon Musk. Again, too, another person who's a Democrat went with Trump as well. And basically to really expose all of the fraud, the waste, the abuse. I mean, when we're talking about putting together, transgender operas in Central America, it's just outrageous. And people are seeing that. And I think that's very important. And then, of course, my area of most interest is on education. And I've written about it. Thank you for making reference to the article again in the Wall Street Journal. I urge your listeners to please find it online and read it. We have found that, bureaucracy does not promote an educated person. And that's what the Department of Education had become. That's how it functioned. It was created in 1979 under then President Jimmy Carter. And that was basically a deal, a sort of a giveaway to his powerful political folks, the teachers' unions nationally. And we've seen since that time that education in the nation, it hasn't gone up. It's actually only gone down because bureaucracies don't put much money into the classroom. It's really hiring bureaucrats and putting regulations. So I am pleased to see where it's going. The president did sign his executive order. He did put that out. The secretary, who you acknowledged, is in the process of basically eliminating the department. And what that would mean is, shutting it down, getting rid of unnecessary bureaucrats, middlemen who basically pass through, take a cut of the money and then pass it through to the states, and really returning education back to the states where it belongs so that the money that's there, it goes to the states. It doesn't stay in Washington, D.C. There's a lot we could go into that, but I think overall, it's working. I support it, and I applaud the speed with which the president is working to accomplish, to basically deliver on the promises he made.
One listener just wrote me as you were speaking and said that I should ask what will happen to Title I and the issues related to students and students with disabilities. Do you have any information on Title I and that whole thing?
Absolutely. Abolishing a bureaucracy, a department, doesn't take away the law. So Title I, Title IX, looking again to at funding for special ed students, protecting student civil rights, all of that will continue. But what we will see most likely, and I made recommendations in the article as well, is these some of these functions will be transferred to a more appropriate unit, so that it's not going to be dissolved. And this is what the Democrats are saying. Special education, for students, that is a right in law. The nation does acknowledge and protect and honor and want to make sure that our special education students do have access, to a free and fair education, and that will continue. It's just that it may not be under a very bloated, bureaucratic Department of Education. It will be moved to a different area, and the bulk of the money, it will be returned to the states. So that, for example, in California, California will say, okay, here is the money that otherwise would have been collected, sent to D.C., and then sent back bit by bit to California for its use, or New York or Texas, whichever state is there. And basically, these states will have the money right away and use it in ways that are meaningful and impactful for their special education students. And what that means largely as well is that then the spotlight is on each of these states, because education is a state issue. And the states can no longer just say, oh, I'm blaming D.C. and the politicians back east because we aren't educating our students. They can't play that game anymore. Parents can't be given the runaround to say, well, we're failing students in, say, California because Washington isn't responding. Nope. Here's the money. Here's the share of the resources. California, you do your job, and you start educating students the way that really they deserve and merit. So all of those issues will not be taken away. On civil rights complaints, again, too, most likely this may fall under Department of Justice. If you think about it as well, the Department of Education administers and takes a look at some of the student loan programs. Maybe that moves over to Treasury. So if you think about it, it's putting the services in the appropriate entities that it should go under, while eliminating the bulk of the administration, the bureaucracy that are there that really don't need to be there any longer. And so that way, education dollars are streamlined and they are expedited more so into classrooms in the various states across the country.
Understood. So when you and others, including the president, make the argument that the Department of Education has failed to improve academic outcomes since its creation in 1979, I'm sure there are going to be some that suggest, well, couldn't the problem be that it was underfunded or mismanaged or undermined rather than the existence of the department itself? Wouldn't a reform effort be more practical than an outright dismantling?
No, I don't believe that at all. It's always the argument. When I take a look at, again, I'm talking about California, right away we take a look at it and we find that, especially in looking at proficiency exams in reading, writing, and then, like, say, mathematics, we find outrageous levels of failure, just failure in reaching proficiency standards in each of the grades. And each year it's always, well, just give us more money. We're underfunded. It's like, no. The issue is not underfunding. The issue is really, how is that money being utilized? In reading and mathematics, for example, I would argue that much of this is looking at the failure in many states, including California, to tie and to take a look at student outcomes and really tying them and giving credit to teachers for the professionalism that they deserve. Merit pay, bonus pay, tying outcomes to teacher performance. Not 100%, but probably a good amount overall. And so that isn't necessarily funding more. It's redirecting the resources. It's how the money's used. You mentioned that I am the co-founder of a charter school. That's absolutely true. And what we find in many states is that charter schools typically are not funded at the same rates as the traditional public school system, but yet charter schools are delivering greater student success by closing the achievement gaps and then accelerating growth. So it's never about the money; it's how we use the money, and that's how I would respond to that question.
I'm Cindy Lauper with fellow Cosentix advocate, Chef Michelle Bernstein.
We'll share our experiences with plaque psoriasis, with psoriatic arthritis, and Dr. Panico will talk about the possible connection.
Cosentix secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis 300 milligram dose and adults with active psoriatic arthritis 150 milligram dose. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur.
Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com/Cindy.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for an Oikos remix. Like a crunchy storm of sea salt praline pretzels, dark chocolate, and butter toffee, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 Oikos Remix varieties with epic mix-ins and 11 grams of complete protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See RemixYogurt.com.
Hi, this is Debbie, your Blinds.com design consultant.
Oh, wow. A real person.
Yep, I am here to help you with everything, from selecting the perfect window treatments to...
Well, I've got a complicated project.
Oh, not a problem. I can even schedule a professional measure and install. We can also send you samples, fast and free.
I just might have to do more.
Oh, okay.
So the first room we're looking at is for guests.
Shop Blinds.com now and get up to 50% off with minimum purchase. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
If people are just tuning in, we're talking with Gloria Romero. She is a former California state legislator, and she's written a great deal about education, been an activist in the education field, and she has been very, very encouraging when it comes to some of the things the Trump administration has done and is in the process of doing on education. Gloria, there are critics that say eliminating the Department of Education creates this patchwork of wildly different education standards across states, potentially exacerbating some inequalities. How would you ensure that students in Mississippi, for example, receive the same quality of education as those in Massachusetts?
Well, this is one of those issues where people need to think about what is it exactly that they want. There is not a national education program. There isn't. And I would even argue that there need not be. Because remember, education falls under the states. So even right now, as we speak, there are different funding levels for education by state, because that's up to each governor and each legislature to decide their rate of funding for their own education programs. There have been efforts underway to try to, let me say, nationalize or have a standard curriculum. There was a lot of uproar about that. That's what Common Core represented, for example. So a lot of people said, no, we want to have not only state curriculum, but local decision making as well. And so those decisions are still up in the air as to how they go. I think the question is really that, and this is where I am very believing of this, there needs to be a national assessment, some kind of a metric where we would understand how are students doing in each state. And that's where the NAEP data, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the data is used. It isn't a mandate per se, but this is data that's collected and it looks at each state. And then it breaks it down to compare, how states are doing. First, as a country, and overall they find, the NAEP data, which is very respected, they find that as a nation overall, we are not reading. We are not teaching reading and mathematics in this country. We're falling behind the world. But it breaks it down state by state. So something like this will continue. It exists right now, even when right now, as we speak, every state in the nation has its own curriculum, its own funding levels. There is not one metric. And by abolishing the Department of Education, that's not going to impact that. NAEP and the measurement of educational progress will continue because it's not dependent on the Department of Education. And in fact, I think it's even going to be more relevant because it will shine the light even greater on Mississippi, Georgia, California, New York, to really begin to understand how are students learning, where are they falling behind, and what can those legislatures and governors do better compared to other states as we speak. That's supposed to be going on now. We do get data, and that won't change. I think it'll, in fact, even shine a brighter light.
The federal government played a major role in issues like desegregating schools and enforcing education rights, especially for students with disabilities and for students that might be members of minority ethnic groups. Without the DOE, what would prevent states from backsliding on some of those protections?
Well, if you think about it, the most important desegregation case, Brown v. Board of Education. There was no Department of Education back then. When you think about it, the most important desegregation case in the nation, and that stands in law today, and by which anybody who is discriminated against in the United States of America can use as a basis of law to pursue integration, to pursue non-discrimination. You don't go to the Department of Education. That's why I get into Department of Justice. And that's why in looking at the abolition of the Department of Education, the argument is maybe put it under the Department of Justice, which has the obligation, which has the responsibility of looking at civil rights issues. So that's why the argument is it's probably more appropriate there under a Department of Justice rather than a Department of Education, which, remember, it doesn't educate anybody. There is no direct student contact. It basically collects money, doles out money. That's really what the Department of Education does. It works as a middleman, and we don't need that. Cut out the middleman, take the money, abolish that bureaucracy, the top administrative level, and basically start giving the money more to the state. So, I'm very strong on looking at civil rights issues, on looking at integration, and we know that you never needed a Department of Education for that. I mentioned that it would be really cutting back on the heavy administrative bloat. You should realize that, under the Department of Education today, that largely we find that there are, like 4,400 employees in the federal department, and that, if anything, the education department, as it has been allowed to function, has basically morphed into really a public works system. And each year, like charter schools like what I have, traditional districts across the country, we end up having to do a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of regulation. It's a lot of reporting. And many of us have to hire, the experts, the consultants, in order to do the reporting to the Federal Department of Education. So what has happened then, since the time that the department was founded, it really has created what we call like a little, cottage industry that has grown significantly to basically create all these consulting jobs and experts to help guide school districts and schools to just get the reporting to the federal government. All of that can be eliminated for the most part. So it's something that we believe is another benefit.
You've been very generous with your time. I want to keep you a couple more minutes if I can, though, because you've proposed, not only in this conversation, but previously, block grants as a way to return education control to states. But states with the worst performing schools are often the same ones that mismanage funds or resist reforms. How would you prevent corruption, waste, or funds being redirected away from students in states that might not do a good job managing it?
Well, those will have to be taken on, state by state, because the question could be asked right now as well. How is this done? And it's going to take vigilance from the voters. It's going to take, electing people with integrity, good governors, state legislatures. Each of them have auditors. They have oversights. Each state, I believe, has its own Department of Education to administer its state programs. But the other thing that can be done as well, I believe, is to have, I call them, the strings attached, whereby the federal government can say, okay, here's this money here, here's a grant, but you have to meet these criteria. You can't just send money out to a state and then all of a sudden find out that the lead education officials and commissioners in that state ran off to Vegas to go gamble. You can't do something like that. There's a way to have, requirements in order to compete for and to get the money. And that most likely would continue as well. But at the end of the day, I really do believe that it's going to take a lot of vigilance and really working throughout the country to ensure that you have people with high integrity and strong ethics to run governmental programs. Because as we've seen with DOGE, we are finding corruption in a vast number of agencies and entities everywhere. And so we've got to crack down, shine the light, look at it. And I think once you start eliminating that whole layer of administrators and bureaucrats that basically clog the Department of Education, I think we can get through a lot of the grift.
You've been a supporter of various types of school choice. A lot of folks will argue that expanding charter schools or even expanding, sometimes they're called vouchers, sometimes they're called education savings accounts, comes at the expense of traditional public schools. Do you see any role for a federally supported public school system in the future? And what do you say to those criticisms more broadly that the expansion of charters or ESAs means money's being taken away from public education?
Well, I support whether you call them vouchers, ESA, opportunity scholarships, charter schools, homeschooling. Magnet schools are considered to be an option. This is what I believe. It's not about the system. I'm not interested in saying I support, a system. I'm interested in student learning, and I believe in parental school choice. Parents, I have long argued, are really and should be the architects of their own children's futures. It's the parents who should have a variety of choices available to them. Maybe somebody would like a charter school. Maybe somebody else wants the traditional district school. Whatever that parent wants that's right for their child, they should be able to use it and use it with successful outcomes coming out once the child is enrolled there. And we're not getting that right now. So to me, I look at it, I do believe we are in a crisis of education. We have fallen behind the world. Here in California, when we take a look at the vast numbers of students who are not proficient in reading or not proficient in math, and then you look across the country and it's pretty much the same thing across the country, we have an emergency. We will never have a strong nation if we have failing schools, because education is the key to the American dream. So my goal is to empower our parents to make good, strong choices with the taxes that these parents themselves pay into a system, and to allow the parents to say, with my own tax dollars, I'm going to choose an opportunity scholarship to put my child here, or to homeschool, or to put them in the traditional district. And by doing that, it really raises the bar so that there's no monopoly on education. There's no saying, because you live in this neighborhood, you must go to this school, even when the same district and state acknowledges that that school has been chronically underperforming year after year after year, and yet nothing's ever done. They're just caught by zip code. You have to go there. You can't leave. That's just wrong. It's un-American. And so that's why we argue that, parents should have the choice, and that's what I fundamentally believe.
Final question, and we've been talking with Gloria Romero. Obviously, Linda McMahon's recent meeting with House Democrats suggests there's some deep skepticism about the execution of this plan. Are there areas where you think the administration could do a better job explaining its vision? Not the substance, but more the style.
Well, I'm not privy to those meetings, so I can't comment on those. I just think it's just keeping the message out there. A lot of it is on social media, taking a look at what the news covers. But as we saw, most of mainstream media covered a senator who just bloviated on the floor of the Senate for 24 hours, saying nothing but complaining. All he did was show that he could talk and, with a bunch of hot air coming out of him. So, media would, I don't control the media either. I'm glad that you are highlighting and talking about education on your show. It's very important. But that's why I do think that the more that there can be done with opportunities for the education officials and supporters to go out and to paint this picture, I think it's great. But, and I think the administration is doing it, but there's so much that's going on that how much time do people have to really access everything that is out there?
Yep. Gloria Romero, thank you so much. It's always a treat to talk with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's not quite midnight on my side where I am, but I know you're well past midnight where you are. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. Nice to be back again.
No, thank you, and we'll do it again soon, I hope.